Well, good morning. We are here as leaders of law enforcement in the great state of California to talk about work that we have been doing over the course of the last several months, which is only the latest chapter of the work that each of us has been doing in our careers as leaders of law enforcement, to discuss how we can do our job better and how we can meet the expectations of our community, and also how we can just be smart and rededicate ourselves to doing the work that we know we want and desire to do, which is to keep communities safe. I'm proud that I have so many great leaders here who are going to speak with you in a moment, but I want to thank each of them and the folks that they lead and represent for their great work. So right now there's a very important conversation taking place in our nation. And it is a conversation about the relationship of trust between law enforcement and the communities we have sworn to protect. And recent events, obviously, have called into question whether that relationship is solid and whether it is a good relationship. Everything from what has happened in South Carolina to Ferguson to all over the country. And so we know, as leaders of law enforcement, that it is critical that we as leaders articulate our commitment to strengthening the trust between law enforcement and the communities we serve. And obviously, many of you know, for decades, California law enforcement has been a leader for the country. We can go back to the 1970s. We can go back to the 1970s and look at places like our neighbor San Diego, who back in the 70s took upon themselves the responsibility for taking a look at this new term called community-oriented policing. And they did a study which highlighted the work that we can do as law enforcement to focus on that as a legitimate issue and as a way that we can conduct training and develop skills to, again, strengthen the relationships of trust. As a career prosecutor, I know firsthand that the relationship of trust between law enforcement and the community is critical not only to public safety but also officer safety. It's critical to having witnesses come forward. It's critical to having victims come forward. It's critical to having jurors sit as they deliberate on criminal charges, to have the confidence in believing and knowing that justice occurs in our streets and justice should therefore occur in our courtrooms. So this is the work that we are talking about. It spans what happens on the street to what happens in courtrooms to what happens in living rooms in terms of individuals' belief that they will be treated fairly and that their voice matters, that they will be treated as equal to anyone else, and letting them know that they should trust in our system of justice. So that's why we are here today. And specifically, in January of this year, at my inauguration for my re-election as Attorney General, I announced that I would start the conversation with my own backyard. And in particular, I directed Larry Wallace, who's the director of the Division of Law Enforcement for the California Department of Justice, I directed him to engage in introspection, to do an analysis for me of what is occurring in the California Department of Justice, and in particular in our Division of Law Enforcement, as it relates to looking at, critically evaluating, concerns about implied bias and use of force. And so I directed him to do the work of doing an analysis of what was going on with our special agents, with our command staff in the California Department of Justice's Division of Law Enforcement. And I gave him 90 days to get the job done. And of course he performed as always. And what he did, and he is a long-standing leader in law enforcement, is he got right to work and started doing the work of interviewing and talking with the various members of our Division of Law Enforcement, talking with our partners in law enforcement, which are reflected in the folks that are standing here today and others who aren't with us right now, talking with folks at a local level of law enforcement, statewide and federal, talking with district attorneys, talking with defense attorneys, talking with community, with youth, and figuring out how can we upgrade and update the work we are doing in the California Department of Justice. And so we're here today to announce our findings and our recommendations, and all of this in the spirit of transparency. And part of what I think is important about what we are doing today with these law enforcement leaders is we are being transparent in saying, yes, there is work that we continually need to do to rededicate ourselves to excellence. And we acknowledge that that work can be done and should be done in furtherance of excellence. And so I say that with also a great deal of pride in saying, back to the point about San Diego, California law enforcement has led the nation in many ways around the best law enforcement practices, and this moment and going forward are no exceptions to that rule. And finally, I'll say that the sacred trust between the men and women of law enforcement and the communities we serve is essential to a strong and safe California. So the 90-day review that we conducted in the California Department of Justice, essentially what we did is we started by looking at our internal policies and procedures. And we did that because, of course, we need to look at our own house first. And we did not just review the procedures, but we also identified what we are doing that involves innovation and best practice. And while we were doing this, we, of course, realized that it was not only we not only had a need to do an assessment, but we also found that we had a need to upgrade and update and in some ways change our approach. So as of today, to that end, we have developed and implemented a policy on implicit bias and racial profiling. It's the first of its kind of the California Department of Justice. As of today, we have also trained, over the course of the last 90 days, the Division of Law Enforcement of the California Department of Justice, command staff, and many of our special agents on the work that they need to do around fair and impartial policing and implicit bias. And we will train the remainder of our agents by the end of the month. As of today, we are the first statewide agency, law enforcement agency, to adopt a body camera program, where we will be sending our agents out in specific divisions with body cameras and testing that out and exploring it through a pilot program to conduct our field operations and to determine best practices for the California Department of Justice in that regard. We are also creating the nation's first ever implicit bias procedural justice training, which will be certified by the Commission on Police Officer Standards and Training, which is known as POST. This work is happening in partnership with Stanford University. We reached out to some of the experts there, and in particular, Stanford University professor Jennifer Eberhardt, who is a nationally recognized expert on these matters. And she, along with the folks in the Division of Law Enforcement and POST and our law enforcement partners around the state, will finalize this training, which we expect will be certified by POST and will be available to peace officers throughout the state beginning this fall. I could not be more proud of the work that Director Larry Wallace has done in this regard. I know it has been about being an excellent professional and has also been personal, knowing that there is an incredible amount of good that we do and we can always do better. We also, as part of the 90-day review, convene law enforcement leaders from around the state into what we have named the 21st Century Policy and Policing Working Group of California. So the 21st Century Policing Working Group. And we have convened them over the course of 8 meetings in the last several months, in the last few months, to talk about what we could do to have some very honest and frank discussions about what's working and what's not working. To have honest and frank discussions about things like how can we not only train the men and women who are on the ground, but how can we do it in a way that is effective? Because this initiative has not been specifically and intentionally about grand gestures, but how can we actually make a difference? Not just dedicate ourselves to a process, but make a difference. And so to that end, the 21st Century Policing Working Group broke down into 3 subcommittees on their own. One is focused on community-oriented policing. Community-oriented policing is a term that generally means collaboration between the community and law enforcement. And so the work of the Community-Oriented Policing Subcommittee has been the work over the last few months of working across the state, local, and state agencies to implement successful community-oriented policing strategies and to highlight the most effective community-oriented policing strategies in the various departments across the state. So an example of one of the successful programs is Ceasefire in Oakland, and there will be more discussion about that. Another, the second of the three subcommittees, is dedicated to procedural justice. So procedural justice is a term of art used among law enforcement professionals and academics. And it essentially is referring to a philosophy of law enforcement, which is, whereas community-oriented policing, it's about highlighting specific programs and initiatives, and procedural justice is about a philosophy which we adopt and embrace. And essentially it means that we are going to engage in procedures where police will work with the community in a way that treats the community with respect and lets the community know that their voices matter. So an example of a procedural justice approach is the work that is happening in Long Beach. Our sheriff was a former chief of Long Beach, and maybe he wants to talk about a little bit of that. But it's called Why'd You Stop Me?, which is essentially an approach that says we're going to adopt a way of doing business that gives the community information about how we do our job, why we do our job, why we engage in certain behaviors. And it's proven to be quite a model for many areas. So procedural justice is another subcommittee that has been formed by these law enforcement leaders. And the third is dedicated to effective training. And we purposely talk about effective training. As I mentioned before, training in and of itself, we all know, any of us as professionals, is not sufficient if it's just about talking instead of making sure that the listener has actually embraced and received the information. So, to that end, how do we judge training on whether or not it is effective? It's not just that we conducted it, it's that it actually has had an impact. To that end, the Effective Training Subcommittee of the 21st Policing Group has engaged with, again, Stanford University to start developing metrics through which we can analyze the effectiveness of the training we are conducting. So, for example, we're going to talk a little bit about, and Chief Jerry Williams has talked about some of the work her department has done in evaluating the effectiveness of training by doing community surveys after the training has been conducted to get information, empirical evidence from the community of whether there has been a change or an impact since the training was conducted. So that is a very important part of this overall work, which is let's make sure that what we think will work actually works and is relevant to the community. And again, these discussions have been led by representatives of the Los Angeles Police Department, the Oakland Police Department, San Francisco Police Department, Stockton, Sacramento County Sheriff's Office, and Post, and they were just the committee chairs, but almost every aspect of California law enforcement was present. So I'll say that this work is just the tip of the iceberg, but is very critical and really does, again, demonstrate that law enforcement is taking a role of leadership around this discussion. The role of the community. So in my inauguration, I said we would convene law enforcement, but also convene the community. And so what we did over the course of the last 3 months is also separately bring together folks from the community and ask them and talk with them about their relationship with law enforcement and their relationship of trust with law enforcement. And specifically, I was present for 2 meetings that occurred in the South and East LA with youth who were predominantly African American and Latino young men between the age of about 15 and 18. And they were very honest and very direct. And I'll say, first of all, they wanted to be there because they want to have this discussion and participate in solutions. And it was an interesting discussion. It was a discussion where these young people said they want to live in a safe community. And I think in this conversation it is important to identify a myth. It is a myth to suggest that these communities don't want law enforcement. They do. These folks that we met with, all people, want to live in a safe society where their children can walk to school and be safe, where their elder relatives can exist where they are, and be free of predatory practices and live in a safe community. All people want a safe community, and anyone that you talk to will tell you they do want police to be available to them and to protect them. So the question then becomes, how can we work on establishing a relationship of trust and continuing to renew that commitment? And so the conversation we had, in particular with these young folks, was interesting. They talked about interactions that they had that were unpleasant. They talked about interactions they had which they believed were unfair. And they also talked about what they thought the solution should be. They talked about the idea that they'd like to have more picnics with law enforcement officers and police officers. They did. There was one young man who talked about coming back from a concert, and he got stopped and he didn't know why, and he felt that he was being profiled. And he said, and I got home and I just felt small. And I didn't know why I got stopped. And that frustrated me also. And he said, and I can imagine my friends feeling like they would be disrespected to have that experience and then want to lash out. And it made me feel bad about myself. And I said, okay, so what do we do next? What's the solution look like? And he literally said, well, it'd be nice if we could have a picnic with the police officers. And it was such a profound moment because this young man, in all that is about optimism and innocence, said, I want to work on this relationship, and I would actually like to have a picnic with the police officers that police my community. And I think it's a really important statement. Again, everybody wants this relationship to be a good and a healthy relationship, and everyone is committed to making it happen. So I'll close with that story and just saying this. It's a difficult conversation. I strongly believe that if we are to move things forward, we have to be committed to being honest, and we have to be committed to knowing that things can be better. And in particular, we should be committed to knowing that California law enforcement has traditionally, and I believe will continue to be, a leader in this and many other discussions. So with that, I want to now introduce and thank Chief Charlie Beck, who will talk about his leadership of the Los Angeles Police Department. Thank you.
Good morning. First, I want to thank our Attorney General for her leadership on this issue. She is absolutely right. This is a national issue, and then it is a California issue. And she has brought all the major players from California law enforcement together over the last few months to talk about this issue, to work on shared solutions, and to work on this issue in the way that it needs to be worked on, as a national, as a global issue. Fair and impartial policing is the goal. And in order to achieve that goal, we have, at the Los Angeles Police Department, put over 100 people in our command staff through 8 hours of fair and impartial training by Dr. Laura Friedel, which I believe is the same training that the AG has used for her folks. And by June, we will have trained our entire patrol force in a 10-hour course on the same subject. It is very important that we build relationships. Policing is all about relationships. The discussion right now in the Los Angeles Police Department is exactly that, relationship-based policing. And in order to facilitate that, in order to make sure that is not just something that the chief talks about, we have formed a community relationship division which coordinates and educates all of the community relationships efforts of the Los Angeles Police Department. Over 40 police officers specifically to coordinate all 21 divisions, all their community relations sections, all of our community partnership solutions in our housing developments, all of our social media, in order to build relationships and increase transparency with the goal of building trust. It's an important discussion to have. It's a discussion that has to be had on a statewide level. And in California, we are extremely fortunate to have the top cop in our state not only take this on as a challenge, but put all of her effort behind it. And that will make a difference in California And as California goes, so goes the nation. Thank you.
Okay, next we have the Sheriff of Los Angeles, Jim McDonnell.
Thank you very much, and it's my pleasure to be able to be here today with Attorney General Harris and other law enforcement partners and friends to discuss some very important issues. I was honored to be part of the AG's first meeting earlier this year when a number of us came together for a candid and productive discussion about how we strengthen the bonds of trust between law enforcement and the community that we serve. I think in the last year we've seen a lot of conversation about the police and the community, and almost the police versus the community, or vice versa. The police are the community, are part of the community, and vice versa, and we have to work together and move forward with that attitude. Today we're here to put a spotlight on the important work that we have been doing and to make clear our ongoing commitment to continue this work as we develop new thinking, enhance training, and to identify best practices across the nation. These strategies will enable us to strengthen the vital and at times fragile bonds with our community. Few issues are more timely or more critical for law enforcement today. I've long believed that the law enforcement functions best when we work with and not simply in our communities. Community policing is not just something that we do on the side to satisfy critics. It's who we are. Last year has been a difficult one for many in our nation, and certainly a challenging one for us who committed our careers and our lives to law enforcement. The aftermath of events in Ferguson and elsewhere have highlighted a number of different things. That as far as race relations in our nations have come in the last 50 years, we haven't come far enough. That within law enforcement we need to be ever aware of not simply the work we do protecting our community, but also the role our profession at times plays in perpetuating inequality. That our responsibility to the victims of crime does not end when the yellow tape comes down. That mental illness is not a crime. Law enforcement must also be better trained in de-escalation techniques and strategies for avoiding force when we encounter individuals suffering from mental illness. And that however strong our policies and however thorough our investigations will be ineffective without the trust of the community. We've had many lessons to learn from here in Los Angeles, but we've also had many successes, but still many ongoing challenges. Too many of our residents experience violence and trauma akin to that of a war zone. Too many of our children have seen gun violence and know what murder means at much too early an age. And we're incarcerating too many individuals who are simply suffering from drug addiction, mental illness, or the consequences of poverty. And too many men and women who've dedicated their careers to law enforcement feel that the challenges that they face are not always understood by the communities that we serve. So for all of us, recent national events create both a challenge and an opportunity. But as a police chief in Indiana appropriately said in the aftermath of Ferguson, the task at hand is to embrace the wake-up call and not to fall back asleep. Today we're all here collectively to embrace this past year's wake-up call. California is a state with many challenges, but also a state that prides itself on innovation and new thinking. With the leadership and partnership of individuals such as Attorney General Kamala Harris, we're bringing new ideas and smart strategies to these issues. And I'm proud to be part of that effort, and I thank AG Harris for her continued leadership on this issue, as well as in many other areas. Thank you.
Next we have Stockton Police Chief Eric Jones.
Thank you, Attorney General. And I just want to say, first and foremost, I appreciate the Attorney General's leadership, also, as Charlie Beck said, from LAPD, to include law enforcement across the state. I'm representing some of Northern California. And this state really is, I think, leading within the nation in a lot of the work that's going on. I'm honored to have co-chaired one of the subcommittees that the Attorney General spoke about. And I want you all to know the conversations that your law enforcement leaders had across the nation would impress you. We get that we've got some work to do and that we understand the importance of our community and us doing it together. Law enforcement's not going to go this alone. Community's not going to go it alone. We need to work together as we move forward throughout our state and across our nation. Speaking for Stockton, we've done some procedural justice training there. We actually trained our entire police department, both the police officers and all staff within the department. And we're very pleased with that, and we found it very interesting that it was the highest rated course internally we did within our department among our own staff. So they get it too. They want to talk about these issues, and they understand the importance of us working together in what we call principled policing. policing that is based on the very values of what the industry is about, protecting the constitutional rights of everyone. It's important to Stockton, it's important to the Attorney General, and I think you would all be pleased that law enforcement in California gets it, and we're doing a lot of hard work here. And again, thank you to the Attorney General.
Thank you. Next, we have Oxnard Police Chief Jerry Williams.
So I will echo the comments of my peers. Thank you so much, Attorney General Harris, for your leadership. It takes tremendous bravery to engage in conversations with people who may have adverse impactful differences to what you're talking about. And AG Harris has taken this and she has run with this, and I'm so proud of her. I'm representing the California Police Chiefs Association, which is 350 or so municipal chiefs, and we too are engaged in this dialogue and having this discussion about principled policing, procedural justice, and implicit bias. Quite frankly, we're part of the community, meaning law enforcement, and the community is part of law enforcement as well. We cannot do this alone. At the Oxnard Police Department, we've engaged the community's voice by nature of surveys. We also took it a step further because there's some regard to what's going on with our employees internally. We've also conducted an internal survey to ensure that what we're sharing with the community and what we're sharing within our department meet and match to make a better, safer community. So thank you again, Attorney General Harris, for your leadership and your bravery, and we look forward to making a difference in California law enforcement.
Thank you. And finally, we have Oakland Police Assistant Chief Paul Figueroa.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Attorney General, for your leadership in this topic. I think, I'm kind of going off my notes here for a minute,
Just
but
tell the truth. Speak the truth.
you know, it's so often difficult to get coordination across the state. You know, it's easier for us to reach out to Stockton because we're close and proximity matters. Sometimes when it's about when it comes to communication, and so having the Attorney General's office step in this very important point in leadership throughout the nation, frankly, and it's really important time in California has been significant because their office and the Attorney General has been able to get the state at the same table at the same time, and that's really, really important because we can learn so much from each other, whether it's San Diego and the movement they started in the community-oriented policing era to all the great things that are happening throughout the state now. One of the things in the procedural justice training for Oakland PD, we've trained over 600 officers in the principles of procedural justice, and you've heard a lot about that today. And part of what we do is we have a community member come in who co-instructs the course with us, co-facilitates the course. And there's some real roll-up-the-sleeves conversations. There's been a lot over the years that we're not proud of, a lot of things that we've had to fix, and frankly, a lot of work that's still underway. But those are conversations that we have with our community. They share their perspectives. They tell us what they're thinking, and we have real honest and open conversations in a meaningful way. And the feedback we get from the officers and the evaluations of the course are that that's one of their favorite parts, and they want more of it. They want more opportunity to hear the perspectives and have that interaction with the community. And it's important too for the officers to say, you know, we're not treated great sometimes, and that's part of the conversation as well. And so the community members talk to that and talk about how history affects that, and just the fact that we can get out there and have that conversation is really, really important. So it's for us as well. It's one of the highest rated courses we offer at the police department, and the officers have made it clear they want more and more of it. One of the strategies we're using that's really rooted in the principles of procedural justice is our ceasefire program. And I'll just focus on one part. It's direct, respectful engagement with individuals that are at the highest risk of violence in Oakland. Individuals from gangs that are actively engaged in violence at the time we talk to them. You know, and in the past we wouldn't want to compromise the case, or we wouldn't want to, and we certainly don't want to do that now. But even in the midst of gang feuds and gang struggles and the different things that are going on and the dynamics between the gangs, you can still present meaningful choices for them. You can help them make different choices in their lives in a meaningful way. We do quarterly call-ins where there's 55 gangs in Oakland, and we focus at any one time there's 6 to 8 that are really active. And we call members in from those gangs, and we sit around the table, eye to eye. I co-chair the meeting with one of the community leaders, and we talk about the risks of their behavior and the choices that are available, and we'll stand behind them. We'll help them get training. We'll help them make different choices. But that's that direct, respectful communication where we listen, give them opportunities to make different choices, and then stand behind them, and if they choose to make different choices in their lives and get them the training and try to get them to work as best we can. So thank you, Attorney General, for bringing us together where we can have this conversation and really move forward and do the heavy lifting that needs to occur over the next couple of years. Thank you.
I'm going to close this out by just making one point. This is about innovation in law enforcement, and some would think that that's an oxymoron, but it's not. This is about law enforcement taking a responsibility for saying we can be more effective, we can be more relevant, we can be better. And I applaud the leaders who are here and have been part of our policing group for actually taking on the leadership, knowing that there may be some criticism suggesting that we weren't good enough before, but I think having a commitment to being better in the future is laudable. And so I want to thank everyone for being here and for your good work. Thank you all. Thank you.